What's up? We are now unmuted. OWS fam, the nation, my dudes and dudettes. Hilow here, bringing you a very special edition of the Best Ball Plus. And we are going to be joined today by Jordan Vanek of the 33rd team. He should sound familiar if you've been following me around these parts. But without further ado, we're going to bring him in. Mr. Jordan Vanek. How are we doing today, brother?
Doing good. It's like I haven't seen you, Tuesday and Thursday. Usually I'm the host of the show introducing
Yeah.
you. So it's nice to flip the role reversal and talk some offense. I'm
Yes,
excited. I
dude.
don't talk much offense nowadays. It feels like we're too far away for me to start hammering on all things I get working on. So now I get to actually sneak preview some of that type of stuff here.
You haven't yet started a podcast show on mute, so you got one up on me there.
It's true. That is very true. I'm pretty good with the unmute mute button. I was trying to type my fastest to tell you that you were muted there.
I saw that, dude. Yeah, I appreciate that. Solid, man. Well, we got an interesting show planned for today. You are the head of DFS at the 33rd team. You are a coverage expert and a student of the game. You've been around the game a very, very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And self-proclaimed, and I can vouch, wide receiver whisperer. So we're going to leverage those unique talents that you have and talk a lot about the wide receiver position through the scope of, or I guess through the lens of identifying potential outliers at the position, range of outcomes discussion that you have been doing a lot of work this offseason with this idea of range of outcomes at the position. And then you are also your background is heavy in DFS. So we're going to leverage a little bit of that and talk how we can port some of these DFS concepts over to best ball. So super stoked to have you on, man. Thank you for joining us today. Let's talk about this idea of outliers. What makes an outlier? What goes into an outlier? What is an outlier at the wide receiver position? So with that said, what do you consider or what are you looking for when you're looking to identify outlier production at the wide receiver position for best ball?
So from a whole season standpoint, there's a few things that I look for, and it starts with the coordinator. There's a lot of change in that department for a lot of these teams. Are they going to stay consistently? Like how are those parts moving? You have a team like New York Giants who are going to be building upon what they did last season, while a team like the Los Angeles Chargers who are going to be flipping a script. And then how does that influence the previous year's target shares? How do some of the injuries factor into some of those things with the Chargers, who have had their receivers go down quite frequently? And just looking at the offense as a whole, how should they be attacking every single week? And one thing that I've been able to do this offseason is kind of project how much single high or too high a team might be getting based on certain personnel looks or certain formational looks. And from there, I can identify, okay, this is a week for Jamar Chase that's going to be one of his ceiling games. Or if it's a specific team where it's, the Kansas City Chiefs, where I'm like, okay, how does Kadarius Toney get used? Well, Kadarius Toney, one of the best things he was against last year when he got traded and moved over was against too high, because he's a guy who gets it done after the catch. He's a guy that can get that low A dot and still perform, which is not what they have at the receiver core outside of, I guess, Travis Kelce. So identifying the spots where you're going to get different looks, and based on those looks, who is going to be the guy. And as a whole season outlook, you want, your quarterback to give your guy opportunity. Opportunity outweighs everything in best ball, DFS, anything that you're doing. Obviously, we can have the weeks where a guy gets 4 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown, but it's very rare in the NFL to be able to just hone in on that in June or May. So I like to try to figure out what spots are guys going to be heavily targeted and what players are going to earn a high target share, or be in an offense where maybe it doesn't matter that Jordan Addison isn't getting a 20% target share. The Vikings throw the ball 600 plus times. He's going to be able to have plenty of opportunity to eat. And, these are these spots where he's going to do it. And these are the spots where it's probably going to be Justin Jefferson or TJ Hawkinson, and just that revolving door of figuring out who's going to be booming when and why.
Yeah, so one of the buzzwords that you mentioned was this idea of opportunity, and that takes many different shapes, forms, many different faces, really, in the NFL. What are the underlying metrics that you kind of base this idea of opportunity off of?
So for starters, stylistically, who are you? What type of receiver am I bringing up or looking at? Because look, Justin Jefferson can do it against two high, can do it against single high. It does not matter.
Mm-hmm.
Matters is a guy like, Jordan Addison, a rookie receiver, someone who too high in college versus too high in the NFL, very different at this level. And the team that he is, necessarily playing, is this a spot where it's the Miami Dolphins? Miami Dolphins would be a team that I would be terrified to play Jordan Addison because they have a second corner in Xavier Howard / Jalen Ramsey if they want to go that route, where he's going to be a rookie receiver in a spot where he's not necessarily winning. But you look at a team like the Detroit Lions or maybe the Chicago Bears, where their secondary corners are nowhere near the caliber of some of the top teams. Stylistically, I guess, like what I would say or what I would be looking for is when are you getting targeted? How are you getting targeted? And then reflective upon the defense, how are they playing coverages? How did they get targeted? Like I remember last year in particular, the Titans against wide receivers, not slot, just wide receivers down the sidelines. They let their corners play on an island. And if you had a guy that was winning on the outside, that guy dominated those games. I think it was Mac Hollins against the Titans last year had
Yeah.
like 120 or something, while Darren Waller and Devontae Adams weren't doing anything because they were getting into the middle of the field, not getting the chance to work out wide. And for the Titans and Mike Vrabel, he's like, I'm taking away this area of the field. I'm letting my guys be on islands, and it led to Mac Hollins having a big day. I think the Washington Commanders were another team that were like that. And then I forgot the other team that's coming off the top of my head that there are certain teams that struggle with certain builds, and finding that build is what I like to kind of do.
So are you porting some of that information and some of that study that you've been doing into, say, playoff matchups that you're targeting or week 17 games?
Yes, 100%. Where a
All right.
team like the Minnesota Vikings going from the defense they had last year to Brian Flores, I need a quarterback that can sit in there because he's going to get blitzed. And I
Mm-hmm.
need players that can win down the field and win in man coverage, win in press coverage. In particular, they play the Green Bay Packers in week 17. You have a guy like Christian Watson who can go for 150 plus yards on any given day. I am expecting Christian Watson to have a massive day, and it makes for an easy target for a guy like Jordan Love, who, yeah, he's not Aaron Rodgers. Don't get me wrong. I don't expect him to have significant production, but if I'm entering that week 17 and he's my quarterback 2 or quarterback 3 even, I'm in a probably going to be in a unique opportunity for how sometimes I don't even feel like he gets drafted because of the
Yeah.
fact that he's just not that great of a quarterback option.
Yeah. I mean, you look at Christian Watson last year against man coverage, over 3.0 yards per route run. And
Yep.
even Romeo Dobbs was sitting at 2.38 yards per route run against man coverage. So love that shout. It's a reason why I've still been taking some Christian Watson, even though he has that inflated price tag in best ball.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about these things, I don't think a lot of the field is working through this idea of, oh my God, what has changed in the NFL and how can we still target that in May, in early June, in
Mm-hmm.
best ball drafts. So love that shout, man. I want to shift a little bit. I know you've been doing a lot of work with rookie wide receivers, studying. You mentioned Jordan Addison
Yep.
before. And a unique aspect of your work that you're doing at 33rd Team is you're working alongside a former Packers wide receiver and Greg Jennings, and one of my, as a Packers fan, all-time favorite players in the league. Talk to me a little bit about landing spots for these wide receivers. Give me your 3 top rookie landing spots, and then tell me if you have any that are you're kind of shying away from.
So for starters, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Greg was adamant about the Packers.
All
We
right.
wanted them to take
Yeah.
Jackson Smith and
Hashtag
Jigba,
same.
but for him to land in Seattle, and this is the thing that I'm really interested to see. I talk about the change in the offense and building upon what you did last season. Seattle's in a unique opportunity where they weren't running 11 personnel. Like that 11 personnel is when you have 3 receivers on the field, a tight end and a running back. So
Mhm.
they weren't doing a lot of that. They would go with Will Dissly and Noah Fant and play this 12 personnel type of look, which allowed them to be really effective in the run game. But now they have a receiver that, look, he was one of the most dominant slot receivers I've ever watched and one of
Mhm.
the smartest route runners that I've seen from the collegiate level to understand the coverage being played against them, where to get in terms of depth down the field. And if you're doing that at the collegiate level, and I know he was injury riddled this past year, but now he gets into an offense where he's not the guy. It's going to be DK for people like for defensive expectation. You have to stop
Yeah.
DK Metcalf and you have to stop Tyler Lockett. So now he gets to work as this third receiver right now. I think by the end of the year, teams are going to have to start treating him like a wide receiver one, and they're in a unique opportunity where three wide receiver sets, we haven't seen it. Their offensive coordinator comes over from the Rams, where he was a part of the Cooper Kupp, Brandon Cooks, and Robert Woods days. Obviously, stylistically, DK Metcalf is none of those guys. However, JSN is very much a mix of all three. So I'm excited to see him in Seattle. I think that Geno Smith is getting drafted too late, personally. I think that it wasn't a fluke season. He has 4 games against what we ranked as bottom 3 secondaries. Like,
Yeah, the old NFC West, baby.
it's an easy, and the thing is Seattle struggled with the 49ers because 12 personnel played into their hands.
Yeah.
11 personnel, when you get JSN on the field and they want to bring 3 safeties against that, good luck. I mean, they have a new defensive coordinator with Steve Wilks that they might change from that 3 safety look, but he did that plenty in Carolina. So go 3 safeties, your safeties guarding JSN in the slot. I like JSN and winning that matchup. So I don't even think necessarily that Geno's going to have bad games against the 49ers, which is what he struggled with this past year. So that's one of my favorite landing spots. Jordan Addison's the other one. I think both of these guys will be looked at as the, guys fighting for offensive rookie of the year. That's not a running back like Bijan or Jahmyr Gibbs, or even the quarterback position. I think these 2 receivers were the best in the class from the jump for me. Both went to the landing spots I wanted because Jordan Addison's not a number 1 receiver in the
Yeah.
NFL. He's not going to be because Justin Jefferson's there. It's an offense that throws the ball a ton. Adam Thielen surprisingly ran a deep route tree last year,
Yeah. And
which,
every route he was on, he
yeah,
was like second to Justin Jefferson in routes
he,
run.
he ran a ton of
Insane.
routes, but like all down the field. It was
Mhm.
just a strange year for who he is now, and Jordan Addison's going to change that. Obviously, we need Kirk Cousins to not be gun shy and actually trust him throwing the ball downfield. Like Justin Jefferson will call for it and tell him like you need to throw me the ball.
Yeah.
Will Jordan Addison do that as a rookie? Not so sure. So that will be a interesting one. And then the third one, again, not to just keep it into the actually I'll go with this third round guy. I was gonna go with another first round guy, but I'll switch it up to Jalen Hyatt. He's not in a spot that I necessarily love for this upcoming year,
Yeah.
but if you told me he had to go anywhere, I would love to pair him up with Kafka and Dable because I saw them take Darius Slayton, Isaiah
Yeah.
Hodgins, and Richie James and say, hey, these are the things you're good at. This is what you're doing. You're not doing anything else. I don't care if you've, been put in a different role for your career. You're not doing that. Darius Slayton was a lot of deep crossers, a lot of go routes, a lot of like route tree that he loves. Isaiah Hodgins was a lot of stuff underneath. Richie James
Mhm.
was a lot of stuff underneath mixed with downfield stuff. So Jalen Hyatt, what did he do in college? He beat safeties 1-on-1. He used his speed. He got down the field. Now he's in a position where they can utilize him like that because that roster doesn't exactly have that deep threat from the way that he plays and the way that he produced. And he's in a great spot. But I think the guys that it shied me away from to start, Josh Downs, just from a Anthony Richardson, how he plays the quarterback position, I'm not sure that blends well. And I know Steichen threw the ball a ton in Philly as the offensive coordinator there. I don't think that's where they need to go year one. I'm interested to see what offense he does build.
Mhm.
And I don't think that they're not going to throw the ball. I just don't see how Downs out targets Michael Pittman or, I mean, I don't even know if he's going to be out targeting Alec Pierce, who's a guy that bodes well with what Anthony Richardson can do, which is throw the ball downfield. And Alec Pierce is a guy that can get downfield better than Josh Downs at their respective positions. But overall, the rookie draft wasn't the landing spots made a lot of sense. I think Jaden Reed's another guy that I would say is not the best landing spot for what I want, but there's been rumblings that he's getting the slot. And if he does get the slot role in Green Bay, then I'll be much more invested into what he does over Dubs, just from a stylistic standpoint, that he is getting the area of the field that I want. Figured Christian Watson would have that, but we're really early in OTA, so there's not much takeaway there.
Yeah, one of my favorite shouts of the guys you just went through was Jalen Hyatt, but it's for a very unique and interesting reason. I think he's being overdrafted relative to his expected year-long
Yeah.
fantasy output, but he's got that nice, juicy Week 17 matchup with the Rams,
Yep.
and so any drafts that I'm basically, because I'm doing this a lot, stacking Stafford, I look for Jalen Hyatt in the 13th-ish round, whereas drafts where I'm not taking Jalen Hyatt, you can get a sneaky Darius Slayton in the last rounds of drafts, because based on their unique or their respective athletic profiles, they're probably fighting for the same position on the field. When you talk about snap rate, they're both 6'1" plus. They're both run a sub 4.40. So they're kind of similar build type of or archetype of wide receiver. So the fact that Darius Slayton is not being drafted in most draft, or being drafted the really late 17th, 18th round, I like taking Slayton or shots on Slayton on rosters that I don't have that like Giants and Rams stack for Week 17. And then on rosters that I do, I'm looking for to mix in that Jalen Hyatt, a little bit of theoretical components, because when you talk about a rookie, when you talk about Week 17, when you talk about a coaching staff that is I guess very adept at designing an offense to maximize the personnel that they have. You look at that depth chart right now, it's just like they have a smattering of 8 wide receivers it's like, who breaks out from this? But if you bet on the talent and you're projecting for Week 17, you can leverage a little bit of that uncertainty. But the fact that he's going in the 13th round right now, he's being overdrafted relative to his expected outcome for the entire season.
Yep.
So mixing in a little bit of those theoretical components. I love that shout. Love that name. Anything to add on other rookies around the league at the wide receiver position?
I would say Jonathan Mingo's intriguing enough for where he is going, because he's basically going where Thielen is. DJ Chark had a foot surgery. That kind of scares me, just from knowing receivers coming off foot surgeries usually don't pan out in the first year after that specific injury. So Mingo's got rookie mini camp with Bryce Young, which is huge. He's, rookies, quarterbacks usually find guys that they like targeting and just continue to target. I think that Bryce Young with him is an intriguing pair, just because it's such a cheap stack to get to compared to what you're trying to, accomplish in a basketball tournament.
Yeah.
And by the end of the year, the rhythm should be there, and it should be clear whether it's him or it's, Adam Thielen. I don't think Terrace Marshall plays a big role in this offense, because I think him and DJ Chark are more out wide guys, while Thielen and Mingo might be competing for more of that slot type area.
I dig it, man. Also, some of the other work that you've done this offseason with Greg Jennings is projecting or shooting your shot, we'll say, for outlier wide receiver production, wide receivers that could be set up to have a career year. Greg Jennings' top guy was Calvin Ridley in Jacksonville, and your top guy was a guy who I've been hammering in the 3rd round in Amari Cooper. Any other names that you can throw out that you project could be set up for a career year in receiving yardage, touchdowns, just a career year across the board? And then talk to me a little bit about kind of how you approached that unique study.
So when we were going through that, one of the things was like we couldn't take someone that was like top 10 in yards, I believe, the year prior. So there are
Okay.
2 guys that I think are bound to have an opportunity to finish in that top 3 to 5 range. Do I think that these guys will necessarily go ahead of Justin Jefferson? No, but I think they could compete, which is going to, like, specifically, I think that some of these guys, I'm more confident than most that they will finish with a higher production than specifically Jamar Chase. I love Jamar Chase. He is one of the top receivers in the league. He does have to compete with 2 receivers that I do respect and I do think are top 36 receivers in the league, with Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins as well. in an offense that wants to control the ball. Joe Burrow has talked about, run game setting up this. So the two receivers that are in particular that we haven't mentioned, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. Chris Olave goes in an uncomfortable spot in best ball drafts because you
Yeah.
see Jalen Waddle and you see some of the other guys, but he dominated against single high. He dominated against two high. And now he's got a quarterback that's going to push the ball down the field. And when I've looked through, like, they still have a solid offense line. They still have, or they have a run game with Jamal Williams. They have Kendre Miller. Like, they have a quarterback that we just saw Derek Carr hyper target Devontae Adams. I know Michael Thomas is there, and I know that he is still, a functional receiver who could be still great. But Chris Olave showed it. Like, he just put on a clinic as a rookie receiver in the NFL, and he did it without getting anything after the catch. That was one thing that he didn't really have at Ohio State, and he's not going to have that at the next level. But he's going to get open 14 yards down the field and have plenty of those opportunities. So I think Chris Olave can be in that top 5. And then Garrett Wilson. I mean, you had Aaron Rodgers, obviously. You know how great Aaron Rodgers is, and just
on the football field.
Yeah, and you you put Nathaniel Hackett where, yes, no, Hackett was really bad in Denver because his offense is a lot of read based, and Russell Wilson is slow through his progressions, which is something that Ryan Reynolds, shout out to him, pointed out to me before the season, and I was like, never really thought about it that way. And Aaron Rodgers goes through his progressions quick, but the one thing that Hackett saw and Rodgers had was he watched Devontae Adams. The way they used Devontae Adams in Green Bay was awesome. That was, if you're an elite receiver, this is the prototype I want you to do. I want you in motion a ton. I want you in spots where you're having Jalen Ramsey yell across the field like, we need to switch. I can't follow him and then also get my hands on him to reroute him in an NFC championship game. I think it was against them, or maybe it was a wild card game or divisional round game against them, I think 2 years ago, because you just put him in motion so much. Was that LaFleur? Maybe, but Hackett was all access to that playbook, and now he's in a spot with Aaron Rodgers again. Rodgers is going to be running the show there, so I think Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave are the two guys that I would say are dark horses for me to come in that top 3 to 5 range, have a season where we're watching like, how is this guy just consistently putting up production, just like Tyreek Hill this past year. So two guys that I agree hyper targeted. And then Amari Cooper is just in a spot you're going to get so much single high. We watched Deshaun Watson lead the league in passing just 3 years ago. Now he has a full off season to do it. If DeAndre Hopkins comes there, I'm going to be off of him. It's really a scary rumor to me because of obvious connections there. But like, if he doesn't, teams will play single high against him because of Nick Chubb. You have Amari Cooper who wins. He had the highest targets tied for his highest targets of his entire career last year, and now gets a full off season to get right with Deshaun Watson. It's an easy one to kind of be in love with, especially with their division where the Ravens are supposed to be more pass happy. The Bengals, they have Joe Mixon, but I'm not really threatened by their run game. And then also on the back end of the Browns, they add Jim Schwartz to their defense, who's a guy that gives up plays down the field in the passing game. So I think they'll be in more shootouts than what we've used to with them. I don't think they're going to control the ball as much. I think that they built this offense to throw the ball. They added Cooper, Moore. They drafted Tillman. They drafted Anthony Schwartz. Like, they're trying to throw the ball. Now this is the first year I think they do it. And then Calvin playing with Trevor Lawrence is nice to have. Like, Calvin spent the last 2 years getting right. And mentally, physically, and I've watched a lot of the stories and the things that he's posted through social media, and he looks explosive. He looks hungry, and he's in an offense that's perfect for him. Like, Christian Kirk he was a product of volume. He's the idea of me saying, like, you want a guy that gets a ton of volume, because he did. I don't think that volume's there anymore, because I think he falls to that number 2 role, and Calvin's going to be the number 1 and have all the opportunity in the world for Lawrence.
Yeah, man. You also, while you were talking, you mentioned this idea of the Browns are probably going to see a lot of single high, a lot of cover one. How can you make that statement? Walk me through. And this kind of, it'll be a shout out to the work that we've done over at 33rd Team. So if you missed any of that, go check that out. That podcast series has been fire.
That has been a blessing to do that. Obviously, we've had a lot of great points, but the reason why the Browns will get a lot of single high is based on who Nick Chubb is and who their offensive line is. And those two things can dictate why you're going to bring a safety down in the box. And if you don't, if you're going to go play too high against the Browns, Kevin Stefanski has an elite running scheme.
Mhm.
He has always had that throughout his tenure as a head coach, offense coordinator. And then on top of it, a lot of, I believe, the AFC North, it's a division that likes to play single high. They want to do it. It's been their uh, bread and butter, especially when that weather gets awful.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it's just a spot for them to tee off on Nick Chubb because you want to stop him. If you're not stopping Nick Chubb, it's game over. So you need to bring that safety into the box. And then on top of it, for the Browns or in particular, yes, Amari Cooper is the guy that you want to be able to stop in the passing game. Elijah Moore and the other guys aren't exactly proven enough to earn that safety over the top. Amari Cooper can beat the safety and the corner. He's as talented as most receivers in the NFL, so I have no problem there. And you can get these guys to bite off play action. So formationally, I've seen Stefanski earn single high just off the looks that he gives, and just in general, when you're playing Nick Chubb or playing a top end running back, you're going to play a lot of single high. The Titans get a lot of single high. I expect the Falcons to get a ton of single high. Doesn't necessarily mean these guys are going to go throw for 400 yards because these defensive coordinators chose to play single high. Single high isn't exactly an easy coverage to necessarily beat. You need a great player and a great quarterback to do it, and Sean
Mhm.
Watson and Amari Cooper are just that.
And to close the loop there, single high allows you to cheat the strong side safety into the box. So you're basically getting 8 in the box against
Yep.
these teams that have strong running games and have plus offensive lines, which the Cleveland Browns match to a T. So love that shout. A little bit behind the scenes of how the why behind the how there,
Yeah.
peek behind the curtain. So I dig it, man. Let's move on to this discussion of range of outcomes. So we have really two things that we have to be concerned with when we're talking about range of outcomes in the game of best ball. Like seasonal range of outcomes, can this guy outperform his ADP? But then we start getting into the unique aspect of how these contests are constructed, and we transition to more of this like DFS style contest where in the playoff rounds where on we'll take BBM for example, you win a small field single entry contest.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically that. So when you are analyzing a player's range of outcomes, are you also considering this like 1 week range of outcomes in conjunction with their season long? And how do you fold that into your process when you're drafting?
So from a, I guess, like broad side of things, when it comes to the elite level players, I'm not necessarily thinking about their playoff outcomes just from I guess like a narrow point of view. Like I think CeeDee Lamb or well Justin Jefferson, he's going to get it done. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's just the guy that's going to do it. I think when I take one of the top end guys, what I'm looking for is the pairing on the opposite side of things. Like for example, obviously Jefferson plays the Packers. Who am I pairing it with in that specific week? Where maybe I don't necessarily need them during the regular season because I have my rest of my receivers carrying it, or a spot where do I want it to be a run heavy game? Do I expect that? And it's like, no, because it's Brian Flores. So I'll usually find myself taking one of the receivers, whether it's Dubes, Jaden Reed, or Christian Watson. And as far as the mid to late round guys, a lot of it is who are they playing and what
Mm-hmm.
type of coverage are they getting? How many boom weeks can I identify? And how does it, correlate to the rest of my roster build? Where Jefferson plays the Packers, and that's not necessarily a week where I expect him to have a boom game like we saw this past season, where you guys finally just took Jair and like, hey, guard him,
Yeah.
like go get him. Like Justin Jefferson had negative weeks in that playoffs. He probably hurt a lot of teams from making that final just because of what he performed like. So in particular this year, he doesn't exactly have to worry about that. It's a lot of dome games for them, and it's a lot of easy opponents relative to what we are expecting. So with a guy, it's like, Treylon Burks, where the Tennessee Titans are a team that to begin the year, they have a pretty tough schedule from a secondary perspective. They play a lot of teams that we have in the upper tier levels. So it's not exactly the time for Treylon Burks, but to end the season, he has 3 games against bottom tier opponents. So it's kind of
Mhm.
like, all right, so I want someone that's also going to have those boom weeks early on to counter Traylon Burks necessarily not having the greatest of starts. And another receiver that if like I have back-to-back picks, like I'm fine with taking Deontay Johnson or George Pickens, who obviously me and you just argued.
Yeah,
I just argued against him, but he pairs well with Traylon Burks. So one thing that I've
yeah,
been working on is putting who's performing well and kind of win for those mid to later tiers. While in the upper tier, it's just a product of this guy is just good. Like
yeah.
there's not much to add to like Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson that I need to be like, oh man, these weeks are their boom weeks. It's like I just expect that guy to get the targets. He might not have the greatest of games against some teams, but I'm not expecting him to have a complete dud or be out of my lineup per se.
So basically, what I'm hearing is, correct me if I'm wrong, the individual range of outcomes for a given week depends much greater for these later round wide receivers.
Yep.
So let's use an example of, and we'll say like you don't have, we'll use an example of 2 wide receivers that we've talked about so far in this podcast, Jalen Hyatt and Tyler Boyd, who are going about around the same time in these drafts. If you don't have other pieces of Cincinnati or Kansas City, and you don't have other
Mhm.
pieces of the Rams and Giants, is there something that is pushing you either way with Boyd, who has a very constricted range of outcomes from a weekly perspective, to a guy like Jalen Hyatt, who has a much wider range of outcomes from a weekly perspective?
So between those two, I would much rather have Boyd if I hadn't spent a. That's where roster construction comes into point
Mm-hmm.
because, like, say if I took 3 receivers in the first 4 rounds, then I would be probably more lenient towards Hyatt because of the fact that I'm looking for necessarily boom weeks instead of like the casual, like what's the word I want to use? The not floor weeks,
Consistency.
like consistency of Tyler
Yeah.
Boyd, where last year he was really strange. He was actually really good against single high and not so great against two high, I believe,
Yeah.
which is something that I didn't expect. I think that might just be an outlier year type of thing for him. But he's a guy where there's the obvious where T. Higgins or Joe or Jamar Chase go down, you get in the wide receiver 2 in a Joe Burrow offense. I don't really project that style of things for people. I want to go ahead and say like if I spent 2 running backs in the first 3 or had Kelsey with maybe 2 running backs in the first 5, then I would be looking towards Tyler Boyd compared to Jalen Hyatt. That type of, I guess, feel towards it. So roster construction would play into them going up against each other.
I dig it, man. Um, Continuing that discussion a little bit in this idea of range of outcomes at the wide receiver position, what are some unique situations that you're looking to target for this idea of late season upside from these later round wide receivers?
So for start, the Houston Texans, like it's a very like in terms of playoff rounds, they're free. Like
Yeah,
they are free at the wide receiver position. They're not guys that are I'm expecting to do much. No, actually, they have a pretty weak schedule the whole entire year from a secondaries perspective. But in the playoffs, I believe they play the Tennessee Titans twice,
hmm,
which me and you have identified as 2 spots where great. Like I
yeah,
want my receivers going against them. And the Indianapolis in the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns are a team where again they're going to give them single high. They're going to stop Jonathan Taylor. They're going to not let Anthony Richard or they're not going to let that or Devin Singletary or what's his Rashad not Rashad White Damian
Damian
Pierce.
Pierce. Yeah,
Yeah, Damian Pierce run the ball as much. So they're going to be relying on their corners, which are Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome, some of the top corners in the NFL, to cover Tank Dell and some of these other guys. So like when it comes to that later round idea is like I want guys that CJ Stroud's a rookie. Yes, Tank Dell's a rookie. He's young, he's low weight. Yes, John Mechie's coming off of a significant, illness that's very difficult to project, but they're free. They're in boom weeks, and if you get to that final week, we watch Mike Evans, where not Mike Evans, but we've watched plenty of guys have huge weeks in that late portion of the year. And obviously not necessarily all the builds are getting to that, but with how late they're going, it presents an opportunity to be unique. And
Hmm.
At that point in the season, they're no longer rookies. Like CJ Stroud has seen it. Now CJ Stroud, also 2 of those games are in a dome. Like it's pretty. Oh, and I guess it's Deshaun Watson returning to Houston now that I think about it. So like it's really easy for them to have boom weeks in that type of scenario. So for me, I just kind of find who are the later round guys that are going to do that and how do I get them to my roster? And Houston's been the freest team of all so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, you look at their ADPs. The top pass catcher is Dalton Schultz right now at an ADP of
Yeah.
131, and then it's like Nico Collins 138, John Mechie 181. So, like you said, and then Tank Dell is undrafted a lot of drafts. Robert Woods
Yeah.
is in there too if you want to take shots on that. But
I'll pass.
we talked about that idea of like projecting the potential game environments, the potential for this 1 week season, spike week potential. I love Houston. And one of the things that I've been mixing in at a higher frequency now is you can pair any of those guys late with another late guy from the Tennessee Titans. You can front load it with Treylon. But one of my favorite things to do is to pair one of those guys as a skinny correlation with Tajay Spears, the backup running back in Tennessee, which could be, we don't know that situation. Obviously, Derrick Henry's getting up there in age. I feel like we've been saying that for the past 5 years, and he just keeps doing his thing. But yeah, just an interesting side note, secondary correlation that I've been attacking because both parties of that skinny correlation are super, super free. Any thoughts on that with these like secondary correlation type shitty offense type correlations?
I mean, again, me and you have talked a lot about, divisional. I remember you were very into like, hey, I'm targeting the Rams. I want Cooper Kupp and I want, the James Connors and whatever. If they play in week 17, I'm golden. And like we and you have the same philosophy with some of these teams being a little bit weaker. So I think from a skinny correlation, like you should be drafting divisional teams. Like you should be getting a lot of random, like Miles Sanders and Calvin Ridley is a perfect one that I've wanted to target plenty of. Obviously it's a little bit upper in the rounds, but Panthers are going to be running the ball because I think that you have a rookie quarterback that's not the biggest in the world. Like you should be giving him plenty of touches. And the running backs coach of the Carolina Panthers was adamant about getting Miles Sanders in that building, who he was with him his rookie year when Miles Sanders was at his peak. So I think that Miles Sanders with our offense line against the Jaguars is a good matchup. And then Calvin Ridley, Carolina Panthers took DJ Moore over him. I know Narrative Street isn't exactly what everybody wants to go to, but look at Calvin Ridley's numbers against the Panthers and tell me there isn't a little bit of added, like, I was the best receiver in the draft. And I thought Calvin was going to be a Panther. I was pretty stoked about that. And DJ Moore has been great, but he is no longer. So I don't know if don't know how I quite feel about that whole one. But like target them skinny correlations because it does make a huge difference in DFS, and that's how you win. Like a lot of those things where if you had DJ Moore and Mike Evans for week 17 last year, promise you would have been fine.
Yeah, it's okay, baby. You'll
far.
be fine. Yeah, dude. So that's the perfect lead into what I want to talk about next. And this idea of, and your background, DFS hammer, you've won all this money in DFS. You kind of had your come up in this industry, in the DFS streets. This idea of porting DFS concepts and methodologies over to best ball in the specific sense of the contest confines, or the confines of the contest, where it now turns into 3 consecutive small field DFS tournaments, basically. So talk to me a little bit about your process with folding some of these DFS ideas and methodologies into your best ball process.
So my big thing with DFS is not necessarily like correlation is the biggest thing. A lot of people get really worked up about how do I get unique and this and that, and like get so focused in on that. In this particular tournament in best ball, I don't care if I have the Jamar Chase, the Joe Burrow stack that made it there. I want to make sure that the rest, like the different, I guess not the quarterback stack of my lineup isn't stacked, like correlated, or not correlated was the word, overowned. Like I want to make sure that, look, Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, isn't a bad stack to get to. You can pair it with Kansas City if you want, because that's going to get there. I'm not the guy that think that's going to be a boom week. So like I would pair what I with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase going flipping it with
Mm-hmm.
like a Pacheco or something like, you know, not necessarily trying for uniqueness, but being okay with this is going to be some portion of my lineup, not the whole thing. Like I think
Yeah.
that a lot of best ball ideas that I've seen is like, oh well, you don't necessarily want to be hammering Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, or you don't want to be hammering like Tyreek Hill and Tua because that's what all the Tyreek Hill people are doing. And it's like, no, I think that's fine. I think you want to make sure that you're the guy that has the Tyreek Hill and the Tua stack with some unique combination of Alec Pierce and Michael Mayer because they play each other. Like I want to find my uniqueness in my skinny stacks, not necessarily my quarterback stacks. And the way that I do that is just finding games that are in that week, finding players that I like in those particular games, and finding that type of way to get unique instead of the quarterback duos type of stuff. Because I think quarterback duos is pretty like if Tyreek Hill ends up getting a lot of people to week 18 or 17, I think Tua is getting there. Like how many range of outcomes is Tyreek Hill getting there without Tua? It's injuries. That's about it. Like, but Tua's getting drafted in round 8, which is priced into him being hurt.
Yeah.
So
That's a sick shout. And what a lot of what goes into that is in DFS, we're working with 9 roster spots, right?
yeah.
In best ball, we have 18 to play with. So we don't necessarily have to be weighing this idea of don't dupe me, bro,
Yeah.
as heavily in best ball with respect, or I guess comparatively to
Mhm.
DFS. Love that shout. Um, when we're looking for game environments to attack in DFS, it's very similar to how we're trying to project things 5 months down the road or 3 months down the road, whatever the case may be when you're drafting.
Yeah.
Walk me through a little bit of your process of what you're looking for in a game environment in DFS that we can then take some of those lessons over to best ball.
So for starters, game flow. It obviously it's simple. It's simple to say it out loud because a lot of things can change game flow. But I remember watching the Atlanta Falcons play the Seahawks week 3 of last year, maybe week 2. And for the first time in my lifetime of watching the Seattle Seahawks, they played fast.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so they're playing fast. And then I'm watching their defense and I'm seeing dominant out wide corners. Atlanta's not beating them on the outside. They have to beat them in interior. They have to beat them through slot, through tight end. And then I remember in week 1, it was the same thing. And I was like, they haven't given up a touchdown out wide. So I was like, all right. So the next week, they went and they played the Detroit Lions.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, well, the Seahawks played fast last week. Detroit came off a week where they shut down Justin Jefferson. Go back week 1, they played Philadelphia and got demolished by AJ Brown, but shut down Devonta Smith. I'm like, maybe Detroit's just good against like thinner type of receiver. Like maybe they're like Okuda in a bracket can work against the Jeffersons, the Tyler Lockett's, but when it's DK Metcalf or AJ Brown, they can play bully ball. So I was like, well, Seattle's playing faster. Now I'm in identified a matchup where it might be a mismatch there. So I found that as a game environment that I wanted to get to. And then on the flip side, I'm thinking, well, Seattle doesn't get tacked out wide. They have to attack interior. What is the interior of the Lions? You had obviously Jamal Williams and Swift, which backfield duo split. It's kind of ugly. But then you think about TJ Hawkinson, you think about Amon-Ra, and it's like, that's a great thing to get to. I'm going to play TJ Hawkinson with Amon-Ra and DK Metcalf and Geno Smith and get 4 pieces into a particular game and hope that it gets to a 50-point total, 60-point total, because that's what it's going to take to get there. I remember week 16 of 2 years ago, Alex Baker, my former boss over at Stochastic, formerly known as
Yeah.
Osmo, he played 6 people from one game and won $1 million
Yeah.
in a single week because that game shot out 40 to 30. And like when I'm constructing his best ball lineups and picking these, teams, one thing that I like, I want 2 to like, I am fine with taking Deshaun Watson and then getting Amari Cooper, David Njoku, and Elijah Moore. That's fine with me. I know it's a lot of pieces into one pie. You're going to have to find a way to get unique somehow. Or not unique. You're going to find a way to get what Deshaun Watson's out production is. Those are the ways how, and it's not as significant draft capital. It's an easy stack to actually obtain. Like, you got to think of the stacks that are, you have a quarterback that can throw for 5,000 yards. I'm not doing this with quarterbacks that can't throw for 5,000. And yes, 5,000 is the bar for me because it's very hard for people to be relevant enough in fantasy or a best ball tournament when your quarterback's only throwing for 4K. Like,
Yeah.
there's not exactly a lot of room to offer. So I think when I'm looking for identifiers, it's obviously matchup dependent. It's a lot of what we have done the last month or so with identifying whose secondaries aren't good and how do we get the best player in that type of situation, or that environment where Cleveland is now facing the Jets. Like, Mari Cooper's a guy I'm terrified of against the Jets because they have Sauce Gardner and they're playing cover 4 and all this stuff. So it's like, okay, well, this could be Nick Chubb
Yeah.
and Garrett Wilson because I know Cleveland's going to be playing a lot of man coverage. So it's like identifying those types of things because, game environment obviously is important, uptick in plays, and the mismatch into the coverage you're getting against the opponent and who they have and how teams are attacking them, because it's not as simple as this team struggles with tight ends. It's like, I want to know, does this team struggle with slot tight ends, inline
Yeah.
tight ends? Like, I remember the Eagles were a team that was awful against tight ends 2 years ago. They shut down Travis Kelce. Why? Well, it wasn't out slot tight ends. They were one of the best in the league because they threw Avonte Maddox on it.
Yeah.
Their linebackers just couldn't cover Dalton Schultz. They couldn't cover the Foster Moreau. Like, I remember multiple guys getting multiple touchdowns against them from the inline. So I just stopped. I didn't play Travis Kelce. I played Tyreek Hill. He went for like 50 that week. So stuff like that.
Yeah. And one of the things that you mentioned was attacking a certain situation. And one of the players that we've talked about, that you and I have talked about offline previous
Yeah.
or prior to this, is Chris Olave and his playoff schedule and his week 17 schedule in particular, and what kind of coverages we can expect from his opponents during that time and what he is good at and how he can take absolute advantage of those.
Yep.
Give me another name of somebody that you've identified from the playoff weeks that you think could go absolutely ham based on this idea of schematic or what he's expected to face here.
So obviously, we usually are targeting who are the Rams playing. That's kind of that's
Yes.
been the MO. I think it's really interesting to see the schedule of obviously the Rams play the Saints, the Rams play the Giants. Two guys we talked about, Jalen Hyatt, Chris Olave. The one player that I'm really intrigued with that has a very difficult schedule is the Washington Commanders with McLaurin and Dotson. So
Mhm.
which one is obviously the difficulty to figure out. But when I was looking through the formational usage of the enemy
Mhm.
with Kansas City, obviously Sam Howell is a big question mark at the quarterback position. But one thing that stood out to me is they used trips at a much higher rate than league average this past year. I think it was, I believe. And with that, Terry McLaurin had like a 40% target share in that formation with the offense. And they didn't run it significant amount, but they were around league average. So it's kind of like, okay, so Terry McLaurin is dominant in this coverage in this formation. And now you're telling me that he at least has or goes in a week where I believe they play the Rams the first week of the playoffs. It's like, that's a guy that I've identified as like he could go nuclear that first round, and then it just sucks because his Jets 49ers. Like, I found a
Yeah.
lot of guys that have those 2 weeks in them. And obviously the Vikings are another one. They play straight dome games.
Yeah.
like if you want an offense that's going to find a rhythm, I think 5 of the final 6 games for the Vikings are in a dome, which is another big factor into me identifying obvious stuff. You don't want to take out weather. That's how you do it. Trying to think of anybody else. I'm looking through the schedule to see if there's like any clear, like, this guy's going to go nuclear.
The
Houston
answer is
doesn't.
JMO, dude.
The answer
I'm
is
just,
Jameson Williams. That's fair. I mean,
I'm just
yeah,
kidding.
I know you're not wrong. I mean, Stephon Gilmore got a lot of cover too because I think he's lost that step down the field.
Yeah.
I think he could cover cross laterally. I don't think he could cover deep, and that's gonna be a really interesting matchup in Week 17. A lot of people are going after that one. I'm interested to see it. But Denver and Minnesota would be two very good games for JMO, considering Vance Joseph loves to send the house, and then Brian Flores. So
Mm-hmm.
that's actually, yeah, no, you're right. I forgot that we both shared a love for Jameson Williams, even though he's
Let's
suspended for 6
go.
weeks. I mean, he's going so late, it doesn't matter. I'll survive those 6 weeks. Like,
My
I'll
thoughts
figure
exactly.
out, like, I can figure out 6 weeks of production from like a player. Actually, one player that I do love from a season long perspective is Chase Claypool. I don't know how he's going so late. I don't understand it because like this dude was just like an 8th round pick last year. Like, he got traded mid-season and didn't
Mm-hmm.
produce. I don't care. I didn't expect him to produce. Like, who expects a guy to be told you're going to this team that doesn't have an offensive line,
Yeah.
that doesn't throw the ball much? Oh, and Justin Fields dislocated his shoulder amongst getting like some other injuries that happened towards the end of the season. Like, I don't know. It was it baffles me that people are so low on Chase Claypool right now. I think he should be getting drafted much higher, personally.
We got a little bit of time. You're gonna have to walk me through that one.
Okay. So for starters, DJ Moore has never had this competition in the receiving room.
Mm-hmm.
Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool are more talented than the most receivers that we have had. I think the only thing comparable is Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the case. Chase Claypool is a big bodied player that can play the slot. That's not a normal physique to have to do it. I don't think Chase Claypool is an elite level wide receiver, but the one thing is he's going to be getting up against 2s and 3s because he's no longer looked at as a 1, which is what he is better at.
Yeah.
And in a spot where they don't throw the ball a ton, or they didn't at least last year. The one thing Justin Fields doesn't really do is force it into coverage. He's very, you got to get open. You have to separate. And I'm not saying Chase Claypool is the best of separators, but DJ Moore isn't either. So, like, I think there's a greater chance that DJ Moore and Chase Claypool finish in a similar range. I think DJ Moore out targets him, but a similar range of targets than most people kind of expect it to be. Like, I don't think Cole Kmet is a tight end that I'm not really threatened by. They're not going to throw to the running back position. So it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a spot where Chase Claypool, Darnell Mooney's coming off a significant injury as well. It's the other added factor where Chase Claypool was looked at as this very talented guy. He's shown he can get it done in the red zone. DJ Moore doesn't really separate. Like, it's a spot where I see him developing. They sent the 2nd round pick because they believe in the talent, and now that they have a full off season with it, I think it's an easy spot for guys. Like, he can get 95 to 120 targets, and he's going in what, round 18? I feel like, I
Yeah.
don't even know. Like, I feel like some drafts he's not even drafted, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
how are we drafting Terrace Marshall? I think might even be ahead of him in ADP if I'm not mistaken. Like, some random wide receivers that I'm just like, what's the point? Like, this guy was traded for a 2nd round pick. He was productive before in the NFL. Like, Chase Claypool, I remember had like a 4 touchdown game against Philly. I don't know. I think that was the year that Philly just couldn't cover any receiver that was over 6'3".
Yeah.
So I think the talent's not significant of a difference in Chase Claypool versus DJ Moore personally, and I love DJ Moore as a player. I think that the idea that DJ Moore is going to be the unlock to Justin Fields is just mistaken, personally.
So Chase Claypool was around a 10, 11% slot snap rate player until
Mm-hmm.
last season. He jumped up to like 51%. Do
Yep.
you think that is something that continues moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, at Notre Dame, he played a lot of that like hybrid tight end slot role. Like, he
Yeah.
can do it. Will I? Because like DJ Moore wasn't productive until he moved to the slot.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I am interested to see who earns it. If DJ Moore earns a slot and he's just straight there the whole entire season, and Claypool's out wide and Darnell Mooney are out wide, that's gonna suck for Claypool. But like DJ Moore or Chase Claypool was fine in the slot. Like I think he's a bigger tight end too. Like he gets to play like if you're in the slot with him, it's a much bigger threat for Justin Fields to just power his way that way. Personally.
Yeah, we talked about the uniqueness or the lack thereof in quarterback and wide receiver one pairings. Pretty much all you see out of Justin Fields' stacks is reaching for DJ Moore, which is what is holding like DJ Moore's ADP around the 3-4 turn, because that's where Fields is going. So that's actually something that I'm gonna start taking more advantage of. This idea of Justin Fields, Chase Claypool is intriguing to me. I haven't been on that, but I think you convinced me to start adding some of that little love there.
Yeah.
Sweet,
it's easy. I mean, it's if you think about like schematically, how do you defend the Bears? So you're going to give them single high because you don't want Justin Fields running. Their running backs are bigger, like Khalil Herbert. Shout out to my Pee Wee football teammate, Ruckshawn Johnson and Deontay Foreman. Like they're not catching passes out of it. So like the centralized area of the field that they want. So on the perimeter, it's easy. Or if you're running from the slot, like those linebackers are biting. Like I think that Chase Claypool isn't someone that needs to be your wide receiver 3 in rosters, but like he was getting drafted as like, I feel like last year he was wide receiver 3 for most people, and now he's getting drafted as a wide receiver 8. And it's like, I don't know if the situation's any different. Like he goes from Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky with Deontay and George Pickens to Justin Fields with DJ Moore and Darnell Mooney. I feel like it's and also Najee Harris, who caught a ton of passes. Like, I feel like Chase Claypool should be a wide receiver 4, like maybe a little bit later wide receiver 4, but he's getting drafted as like a wide receiver 8.
Yeah, pretty much forgotten about.
Yeah,
that's a sick shout, man. That is going to wrap it for us, dude. Why don't you tell the people one more time where they can find your work, and we'll get on out of here.
You can find all my work at the 33rdteam.com. Twitter is where I post a lot of random research projects. Josh has a chain holding me back from posting some of the stuff that I would love to do, even though it's just too early, man. It's too early in this all season. At Jordan Vanek DFS is where you can find me there. You can see me and Hilow every Tuesday and Thursday. Upcoming, we're going to be talking about, I don't know yet. I don't know. Honestly, I have no idea what we're going to be talking about besides maybe some debates. We're going to talk our ass off with some of this stuff because it's that point in the year where it's like anything we're really saying right now isn't super relevant. So we might have some debates. You can check out the last few at the 33rd Team Podcast Network where me and Hilow went at it for Treylon Burks versus Tony. He was super wrong, had Tony. It's kind of crazy. And then I think we had Deontay Johnson versus Marquise Brown, where I think I took Marquise Brown. I didn't feel great about it, but I took him.
You did. You did. Check those out. Check out all of Jordan's work throughout this season when we start transitioning to DFS over at 33rd Team. You can check out his podcast with myself and some of the cool stuff that he's doing with professional athletes over there at 33rd.com too. So, that's going to do it for today. Again, this was a special edition of the Best Ball Plus, sponsored by 1 Week Season. If you're looking to get into a high theoretical discussion and learning how to become a better best ball player as opposed to just being told who to draft, come check us out over at oneweekseason.com. Sign up for Best Ball Plus, and you'll get access to all this theoretical discussion. We've designed this product to mirror 90 one-on-one training sessions to make you a better best ball player. With that, he's Jordan. I'm Hilow. You know where to find us. We'll see you in the draft lobbies, and we'll see you at the top of the leaderboard.